Okay, we are live. I think we're live. I hope we're live. Hi, Pat.
Hey,
How are you
Phil.
doing?
Good. How are you?
Really good, really good. As we were saying just a few minutes earlier, the first one, as a product manager, we love experiments. So welcome to the Digital Leadership Decoded podcast. And thank you for accepting to be there for the launch.
Yeah, happy to be here and happy to meet and chat with you, and looking forward to the conversation.
That's great. I'm just going to validate that it's starting on the platforms, and then we will be up inside it. So I'm just going to go quickly and look at my channel in the stream. We are live, so that's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
My name is Pat Bergstresser. I'm a product manager at Zillow. And for those who aren't in the US, Zillow is the largest real estate platform in the United States. It's pretty much where everybody goes if they're looking for a home to buy or a home to rent. And I work on the rentals side of the business at Zillow. I just got here. Before I got here, I worked at Capital One, where I was a product manager working in Capital One. For those who are not in the US, is one of the larger credit card issuers in the US. They also have a consumer bank, which is a big part of the business, and they also do auto loans as well. And when I was at Capital One, I worked in credit card fraud, stopping credit card fraud. And then I also spent a couple years working on Capital One's free credit score tracking app called CreditWise, where I was a product manager on that team. And then before that, I was in the Navy. So I was doing something completely different as a military officer. But now I'm in the product space, and that's what I do.
So yeah, tell me a bit more about your past, because it's quite different, being in the Navy and being a product manager. So what do you bring from there? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So the first 7 years of my career, I was in the U.S. Navy. I was a civil engineer corps officer. So my background was in civil engineering, not computer engineering like it is today. And civil engineers are, the engineers who build things. They build buildings, bridges, roads, that kind of stuff. In my time in the Navy, I had 3 different tours as we call them, or jobs. My first one, I was a construction manager, so managing construction projects on a Navy base. My second unit was a deployable construction unit. So we deployed around the world and built things, sometimes in combat environments, sometimes not. And then my last tour was with a Navy Special Operations unit, where I was the engineer for their team on deployment, and I went out and deployed with them to Africa. So very different than what I do today. But I think the great thing about it, and why I think this will be a really great conversation, is that when you're a military officer, and in the military in general, a big focus of what we do each and every day is developing our leadership skills and being good leaders. And so while I didn't intend to be a product manager back when I was a young Navy officer, I do think that the leadership skills that I developed in the Navy have served me well as a product manager, and building teams, and figuring out how to connect with people, bringing stakeholders together, working with people. Like, all those skills have really come together, and I feel like have served me well in the role I'm in today.
That's interesting, and I want to deep dive inside that. We had some questions, but you just opened the floor to the main topic about digital leadership. So what are the skills that you see that are really similar between what you have done in the past and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that they talk about in the military is that everybody's in a leadership role, and the military is very hierarchical, meaning everybody reports to someone else. And I think most of the time in the private industry, there is some hierarchy, but the private industry is much flatter, meaning there's not as many levels. For me, so when I was brand new in the Navy, the steps from me to the chief of naval operations, who's the head admiral in the Navy, is probably like 100 steps. But in a business, you might be an entry-level employee, and there's only 10 steps between you and the CEO. And so I think that's one big difference, and something that influences the type of leadership that you have, and the way in which you build influence. In the military, everything is very directive. And in the military, people give orders, and it's not like the movies where they're barking orders at you. But generally, when your leadership asks you to do something, you don't really have a choice. The only time you have a choice is if it's an unlawful order. And so everybody gets trained on what is an unlawful order and how do you spot it. But those are quite rare. Generally, your leadership is not asking you to do something unlawful. But in the private industry, it's very different. Your boss can ask you to do something, but you can just choose not to do it. And and maybe eventually that leads to you getting fired, but it's certainly not a one-time thing. Is probably not going to get you fired. And if you ask other people around you to do things, they don't have to do them. They don't work for you. And so the biggest difference to me between my time in the military and my time outside is that influential leadership is really, really important. Being able to lead people that don't work for you, and in a lot of times, like, may not even have a reason to help you out. And how do you convince them that they should help you out? And what that all really comes down to is relationships. And so, having said that, though, in the military, you can bark orders all day, and the people that work for you generally will do what you ask them to do. But that's really short-sighted. The way that you build long-term influence and long-term relationships and get more done over the long term is by influencing them. And so while I didn't really realize that at the time in the Navy, that was a skill I was developing, learning that, okay, you can tell people what to do, but giving them context, giving them some buy-in, giving them the ability to influence what the team is doing, it was over time proving to work for me. But what I didn't realize is that when I got out, that skill was going to be 10 times more important. Because in the private industry, you really don't have that authority over other people. Even if you have direct reports, they can just quit the company. You can't quit the Navy. Like, that's not how it works. But
doesn't work.
Yeah, but like, right. But that one of those quotes that you hear a lot is people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And so as a leader, whether you have direct reports or not, like it's paramount that you treat other people well and you find ways to work with other folks. And as a product manager, like being an influential leader and developing that skill set of influential leadership is critical. And so while I feel like it's not something people would expect in the military, at the end of the day, people are people, and you're going to get far more bringing people along on the journey, giving them context, getting them bought in on what you're trying to do. And so that was something that I felt like I was developing in the military and has served me well since I got out.
And so in your leadership journey, when you look at it, because you told us that, you notice that even if you could bark orders, or even if you could use that at your advantage, because it's a bit like a weapon, a special weapon that you have in the military, where you use your grade, or you use, the fact that you're in a hierarchy above, you can use that. And you notice that, even if it's not the best, it's the way it works. But influential was better. In your leadership journey, do you have like a story where for you it was a pivotal moment? It was a moment where you saw like, okay, this is how I want to change my leadership style to, and maybe you were not like that, but not being barking orders like certain people, but more being influential, more being close to people, and not leading through authority in a certain way?
Yeah, I mean, so I have a great story as a product manager, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's perfect.
Yeah. So in my last job, I joined the team, and it was what I'm finding is a pretty typical situation when you join a new team. There isn't a roadmap, or if there is one, it's pretty light. The team doesn't have a lot of direction. They kind of know, like, they know their space, they know what they do, but like, they kind of know the next month or two, but after that, they don't know. There isn't like quite like a solid direction for the team. And it's a very, like, from what I'm finding, like, not that uncommon on product teams, particularly because by the time you hire a new product manager, the last one left 3, 4, 5 months ago, and the team is just kind of floating until the new PM comes in, and maybe the engineering manager is helping lead it in the interim. They're doing some tech debt, something like that. Anyway, that's the situation I showed up in. And what I found is, like, we needed to figure out our roadmap. And over time, what we realized is the team didn't have like an established vision, and we didn't have a strategy. And so what we ended up deciding is we needed to get those established so we could figure out what our roadmap was. But the question was like, how do we build and rally our team around what we're going to do, and everybody on our team, which is our engineers, our designer, our analysts, and myself, but also how do we influence all the teams around us to get on board with what we're trying to do, and how can we best partner with other teams? And so the exercise we went through was kind of two parts. The first was like, as a group, let's come together and align on what we want to do. And one of the things that I hear a lot of people say is like, hey, when you're building your strategy, when you're building your roadmap, include everybody on your team. And that's true. I 100% agree with that. But what I would not agree with is that you get everybody in a room for 8 hours and as a team, you come up with your strategy. Like that is just not how it works. Coming up with
the consensus approach.
Right. Exactly. Like that, like it doesn't work practically. It doesn't work because that's just not how people work. It takes time to put these things together. And so exactly, like the consensus approach, like you don't do that by locking everyone in a room until you walk away with a strategy. So the approach that we took was I had conversations directly with all of our engineers about how they saw things from their perspective. I had conversations with our designer, with our analysts, like getting everybody's input. And then I also took a lot of time offline and I reviewed old customer research. I dove into the data and started to develop like what made sense from what I was hearing. Then I brought the group together and I had like a very, very rough draft, like maybe like a 20 or like just a couple slides. And I'm like, hey, this is what I'm hearing from you guys. Like, does this make sense? Does this jive? And that's where you have conversations where the designer says, I think we need to do this thing. And the engineers are like, that's going to be really challenging. Like maybe we need to find a different way to do it, right? And you develop those conversations early on. And those conversations ultimately lead to, here, these are like the 5 things that make the most sense that as a group, I think we need to go after, right? Yeah. And so then I take that offline and I start to actually put together a strategy deck and I put it together like a draft vision. And that ultimately got that to like maybe an 80% solution. Then I go back to the team and I'm like, hey, based on our conversations, this is how I'm thinking. This is how I think we frame the conversation. This is how we get aligned with what our leadership is prioritizing. And at that point, we've kind of done step 1. We've got our team aligned. You know, we tweaked the vision, we tweaked the strategy a little bit more, but ultimately, you know, that's how we got everybody on board. Was a couple weeks back and forth with different folks, ultimately coming together with something, not trying to do it in one session. And so that was step 1. Step 2, though, was how do we make sure that we have the support of all the teams around us? And so what we decided to do was a roadshow. So I took that 80% deck and I found all of the product directors and other leadership within our org, and I set up one-on-ones with them. And I said, hey, this is like our draft strategy and vision for the next 3 years. Would love to talk through it with you, get your feedback, not only from like a deck and storytelling input, because they were experienced with that, but also like, what do you think about what we're going to do? Are there ways we can partner? Do you disagree with something? Have you seen this tried before and you don't recommend it? Have those types of conversations. And so I sent them the deck ahead of time so they could look at it. And then I got on a call with about 5 or 6 different folks on our team, not the VP of product, but people that worked for her, and had that conversation. And that deck went from what I thought at the time was good, not that great, to way, 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 way better. So those conversations resulted in a really, really refined pitch, much better storytelling, much better communication, but also aligned with those teams, because one of the leaders had said, hey, we actually tried that 3 years ago before you got here. Like, here's some things to consider and why it didn't work the first time. Or we had conversations about, hey, this is how our VP of product thinks about things. I think you need to communicate this a little bit different. And so I got feedback on specifically what we were trying to do, what other teams were trying to do, and how we could partner with them, or things they were going to ask us for support on. And then also like just how to present like in our organization with our leadership, and how to ultimately get that alignment. And so that was step 2. So that was like the 2-part process of like influencing others who don't work for me. None of them worked for me. Not a single person I talked to worked for me, but we gave them an opportunity to provide feedback, to provide insight, for me to ask them, how can I help you? And ultimately, when we brought it to our VP of product, we didn't even talk about the deck. Like, I sent her the deck ahead of time. And when we had our 1-hour call to talk about it, she said, I read it. That looks great. Let's talk about the details, like how you guys are going to do this. I want to go one step further. And so I think my point there is, you know, if you go about it the right way, if you take the time, like influence doesn't happen overnight. It can really serve you over the long term. And so I always encourage everybody, you know, influence is a soft skill. It's an underrated skill. It takes time to develop, but it'll pay dividends in the long run.
And so do you think you will have attained the same result if you have put, you know, because your step, or if I repeat for people that have listened, is basically you go one-to-one, you address, you know, on one-to-one the concern of everyone. And also it helps you, like, for people to onboard them on your idea, bring all of that together, talk to everybody at the same time, do your own work, and after that, do in the second step, which is outside until you reach the VP. Do you think you will have reached the same level if you have put everyone in the room right away?
Oh, no, of course not. And I, you know, I mean, you see this all the time, right? Like you have a team and there's like a product review session. Like a lot of product teams have like once a week, you can come with an idea and everybody's on the call and you get feedback. Rarely do those sessions go well. You know, it's like the ones that I've been on, it's usually the senior person and the presenter, and they're going back and forth. There's usually a lot of follow-ups, a lot of questions you got to come back and answer. And then depending on the org, everybody else may or may not feel comfortable speaking up. If the VP's in there and you've got other junior designers, maybe a junior designer has at a point, but they don't want to sound dumb in front of the VP. They don't want to step on the VP's toes. They don't want to provide feedback. The VP, I'm sure, will cover it. You know, and it's just not the best forum for collaboration. No matter how nice your VP is or how much that VP says, I want collaboration. Like, sorry, man, you're VP. You're VP. Like, it is what it is, right? And so I think it's incumbent upon the people who are actually building the plans and the decks and the presentations of the products to go to those other people in a forum where they feel comfortable speaking up, because quite frankly, they just probably aren't when you have a senior executive on the call.
And did it happen to you where you were like, okay, like I'm gonna go like that? You know, you just thought that it will work maybe that way, and you did it in your experience, maybe, you know, earlier in your career, and you were like, this went down in flame.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We had a project that before I did that strategy deck, we had a project to basically increase our emailing process. Basically, we found on our particular product that customers were responding a lot more to emails than they were to particular actions within the app. And so we had to develop a strategy of how do we know when to email, who do we email, how often do we email? And it was this big project because it was a real great insight that we uncovered through some analysis. And so we had to develop a strategy to actually roll this thing out. And so we developed this like 30, 40 slide deck, and we took it to our VP, and I think we got through like 5 slides. There's just question after question after question. Like, we just couldn't get through it. It was a ton of information. It was great analysis. They're great slides, but she had never seen it. No one had heard of this topic. It was completely out of nowhere. And it was impossible to get through. And that was just her feedback. That wasn't even everybody else around us, right? And so that was like a really great lesson learned of like, how do you build consensus? How do you build alignment? It doesn't happen in 1 hour over Zoom. So definitely learned my lesson there.
And so I guess my question is going to be really simple. Do you believe in consensus? Do you believe that it works? You know, you said yourself, like, we hear a lot, you know, that in the perfect world, you bring everybody, you know, around the table, everybody agrees with the direction. You know, it sounds almost, I mean, to me, like a fairy tale, but I just want to get your opinion, because it seems that we're sharing some of the same experiences and some of the same scars. So
I don't think consensus is necessary. One of the things that I found in the military is, like, people just need to have a voice. They need to feel like they were heard and that their opinion was considered. Everybody knows, like, we all have a boss, and we know that our boss may not agree with how we would go about something, but like, we as people just want our boss to at least listen. At least consider our opinion. You're gonna have a hard time in life if you want your boss to do everything you want to do. Like, it's just not going to happen that often. And in the military, there's this unique relationship between officers and senior enlisted. And this was a lesson I learned very, very early on. In the military, you have 2 distinct populations. You have your officers, which are like your leaders. The requirement typically is to be college educated. And then you have your enlisted, and your enlisted are the majority of the military, like 80 to 90% of the military. And the enlisted are the doers. They're the ones who actually do the things. You know, they're building the ships, they're driving the ships, they're, you know, doing maintenance on the planes. Like, they're the ones pulling the triggers. Like, they're the ones actually doing what the military does for the most part. And you can think of that as kind of like a blue collar type role. And in every single officer has a senior enlisted advisor of varying seniority that reports to you, that works with you. And so for me, like, my first in the Navy, the senior enlisted are called chiefs. And my chief had been in the Navy for 15 years. I've been in the Navy for 1 year. And it was his job to advise me. Like, it was my job to make the calls that we made, but it was his job to advise me based on his experience, what he recommended. As an officer, you will go nowhere if you don't have the alignment with your senior enlisted. And it is a problem. And the senior enlisted doesn't need to agree with you. Like, they don't need you to do what they want. They just need you to respect the fact that they've been there for 15 years and they have some thoughts, and you need to consider those thoughts. And there, once in a blue moon, I did not do what my chief wanted, but I learned very early on to consider his opinion and take it seriously. And I would say 95% of the time, we did what each other wanted. So there was consensus. But there was a few times where I differed with his opinion and I went a different direction. But I can assure you that we had many conversations before I openly said, I'm going to go a different direction. And so I think the same is true, you know, in a product organization or any organization, is that, you know, when you're working on your team, just give your team an opportunity to be heard, for their opinion to be considered, and be open and transparent with the team if you're going to go a different direction and why. And I think 99% of the time that'll work for you. And for that 1% of the time it doesn't, like, that person is just going to have to learn that, like, you don't always get your way, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's learning by doing and seeing what happens. And so if we, just before diving in on, you know, because you talked about obviously your teams and how to, you know, feeling them heard and motivate them and all that, I just want to go back on the leadership. And so what does it mean for you, leadership, you know, in your words, and how do you embody it? And also, like, the difference maybe with digital leadership with our position in as product.
Yeah. So you're saying, what is leadership and what is digital leadership?
Yeah. For you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to me, I would say, like, my biggest focus with leadership is like understanding the people that you're leading. And I think something that doesn't happen enough is forming like a personal connection as much as you can with the people that you're leading. One of the lessons that I learned early on in the military was, you know, I was always being told, hey, ask your troops. And your troops are like the people that work for you. They're like, hey, ask your troops where they're from, about their family, stuff like that. And so I took that advice. And every time I met one of the people that work for me, I said, hey, where are you from? You know, tell me about your family, tell me about your kids, or whatever. And it felt a little contrived initially, because I was like, these seem kind of generic. But what I found through asking those questions is that troop was a person, and they opened up about their life to me, as much as they were willing to share. And that took us from a professional connection to a personal connection. And that personal connection really is what I found matters so much more than anything else. Because if you have that personal connection, you're going to get, it's like a force multiplier in your relationship in terms of you and that other individual working together. And so that's kind of what I've always gone back to is not necessarily asking contrived questions, but just getting to know the people that you work with. And so whenever I join a new team, I do a 30-minute one-on-one with every engineer, you know, and get to know them on a personal level. Sometimes they want to talk more about work. Sometimes they don't. But like an engineer on my last team, he was an Arsenal Football Club fan, big Arsenal fan. And that's all he ever wanted to talk about. So every time we got on a call, we talked about Arsenal. And I'm a soccer fan too, or soccer as we call it in the US, football. I know outside the US. But that was like a great connection we had, and we would talk about soccer, occasionally. So I think, and because of that, we had a great relationship, and he became like one of the strongest engineers on our team. Because when I asked him to do something, he wanted to help me because we had a good relationship, and if he asked me to do something, like I would help him out. So I think, whether it's outside of the digital space or in the digital space, I think forming those connections with the people that you work with as much as you can is going to, and again, it's one of those things, like it takes time up front, but investing in those personal relationships will pay off way down the road. And on top of that, like you get a new friend in the process. So I think it's a win-win all around.
Yeah, I from what I know from the military, and I know it from afar because I haven't been in the military. There is this kind of feeling, and I'm going to take the title of a movie, which is Band of Brothers, like really this family where everybody has your back, right? Which is really different from the business world. We have more of thinking, I think, in the business world where nobody has your back and more everybody's more, we'll stab you if we can. I think it's kind of this perspective that we don't have, and I think this is what you're bringing, and this is what you brought also without like having this sort of camaraderie that you have with your team.
So what's your question about it? Like,
so for me, it's did you feel that? Sorry, because it's true, but it was not really a good question. So the joy of a life. So did you feel that it's something that is missing in the business side that you compare to for example, the military? Do you feel that, there is more stuff that we should understand from the military in that side, for example?
Yeah, like, and again, like I was saying before, like we need to do our best to not be contrived about it. Like you need to actually mean it, and we see it all the time, like in a corporate environment, they talk about people leadership and how to be good managers. And there's also a lot of conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I remember going to DEI has become like a big thing over the past couple of years. And I remember going to like the first presentation where they were talking about what is diversity, what is equity, what is inclusion. And they were talking, they brought in some consulting firm, and they were going through like what these things mean and how we feel about them. And at the end, I remember walking away and I'm like, this just means being a good leader. Like, that's all it means. Like all of this stuff, like
simple.
It's not that complicated. Some consulting firm got paid tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to put together a deck when all they really had to say is like, guys, these are not new concepts. Like treating your team with respect, bringing everybody along, including people, understanding that people work for you, we're all different, and you need to treat them with respect and treat the diverse opinions, the diverse backgrounds, the diverse experiences equally. Like this is not new. Like it's just a new brand or new name slapped on it. And all it is just being a good leader. And so yeah, I mean, to me, like if you want to be successful, you need to realize that you need people to work with you, and having a personal like relationship and connection with those people is a force multiplier over just a professional, connection. And when you start to build those connections, you will see it compound in the work. It is very noticeable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's something that people don't spend time on, and it sounds simple, as you said, because it sounds like you're creating a personal connection. So almost you're looking into the life of people. But as you said, this connection that you're creating, once you're working, you have this connection already. So you're building your work based on this personal connection and not based on nothing.
Yeah, I was. So we were talking before we started. I just came back from a work trip. And my company is fully remote, and every couple months we fly out to the headquarters and do like a group thing. And I tend to go to bed early and wake up early. But after dinner one night, people wanted to go out and go to a bar. I wanted to go to sleep, but I also knew that this was an opportunity to connect with people that I'm normally not physically around. And so I went out anyway. I stayed up late, and the conversations I had are conversations I never would have had otherwise, And so I think, forcing yourself, whether you're an introvert, and people a lot of times think I'm an extrovert. I'm really not. I'm actually quite introverted. But I've just learned over time, like the importance of like building those personal connections is worth
Mhm.
coming out of your shell on. And so to your point, like, yeah, just you got to invest in those relationships. And like I said, like you'll get a lot more out of work, and you also, make some new friends along the way, which is always a good thing.
And so where do you have seen that it had made a difference within your team? By the way, sorry, before the question, I know we have people seeing us live we have Danny that says hi to us from Twitter, by the way.
Hey, Danny.
Well, it's the same. We have some people also watching us on LinkedIn. So the live is working. So we have Fatima that says hi. We have also Maria that says that's okay. So it's really great. We're live in the different platforms. If you have any question, you can ask us. Like we can see it in the comments. So if you have any question for Pat, just don't hesitate to participate in the conversation. So yeah, where did you see that it brought you, something, this personal connection? Where did you see that it was really like something you can, I will not say leverage on, because it means like, you're kind of using it. But what I mean is that if you didn't prepare that, or if you didn't build that, it will have been a problem, I will say.
Yeah, I think so. One of the processes that we built on my last team, and actually something like kind of a core foundational leadership perspective I have is empowering people. I really subscribe to like empowered product teams. And again, like empowered leadership and empowered teams is not a new concept, but within the product space, Marty Kagan has written a book called Empowered, and he talks about empowered product teams. And I really subscribe to like that concept at large. And so as I was like on my last team, as I was like first meeting the engineers, like one of the things that I talked with them a lot about was, empowering them and understanding that they can do a lot more than write code and close out tickets, and finding ways to like leverage their skills. And through those conversations, what I found is one of our engineers was not only quite skilled, but was also quite interested in taking on more of an engineering design approach. Like in the engineering space, some engineers like to get more into the architecture and the design. And this engineer, like he wanted to do that. And so the pattern that we stood up on our team to actually leverage that interest and skill was we started a pattern where every engineer leads one of the features or projects that we take on. And so their job is, I would build a product brief and I would say, here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're doing it. Hey, by the way, this was part of our strategy, so you guys are already familiar with it. And basically turn that over to them. And I would say, I need you guys to figure out the solution. And so this engineer, he was the first one we did this with. We ended up replicating it with all the other engineers because it's good development. But he was particularly good at, okay, here's what we need to build from a product perspective. Here's technically how I would deliver it. And so we gave him like a rough outline of like what we were looking for. And he ended up 10xing it. Like he came up with like, he was building the solution like draft. He would come up with a couple different options, hit the pros and cons of each one, his recommendation. He took it to other engineers, to engineering leaders, brought it back. It was like super refined. And then he was like, oh, and I went ahead and created the delivery timeline. And here's all the tickets we need to draft. And I'll draft them in Jira for you so you don't have to do that. Like, it was amazing. And I do not think that would have happened if we hadn't like if I was just a PM and I was Pat and that was all he knew about me. Like, there's no way that would have happened, and so I think, you're going to build these personal relationships. You're not going to know what comes out of them. And sometimes you build a relationship and nothing comes out of it. But sometimes you build one and that happens. And that like took so much off of my plate that it enabled us as a team to do so much more. Because now I'm not writing tickets. I'm not writing technical solution docs. I don't have to ask other engineers to look at the solution and give us their feedback. Like, he did all of that on his own. And because that pattern works so well, all of our other engineers started doing that for the projects that we would give them. And so, yeah, I just can't like speak highly enough of just like getting to know people and building those relationships, because it can really like unearth some great things.
And so I want to give something to our viewers if they're listening to you right now and they're like, because I saw that also, in my teaching and in my coaching of different people, there is a lot of people that want to be like that. There is a lot of people that have seen the empowerment, and kind of also quitting this, this aspect of future factory. There's a lot of people that want to get out of it. And when you're saying what you're saying, it's totally almost at the opposite of that, where it's like you're empowering the team, I'm giving them responsibility. I'm not a Jira writer, which is the case for a lot of PMs sometimes. So imagine I'm listening to you and I want to apply that. I want to do exactly the same thing. So first, how much time it's going to take, because it's a transformation, it's a change, right? So for you, when you start with a team, do you know how much time it's going to take, or have you seen approximately how much time you need to reach that point? And seconds will be, where do I start? So if I do a step by step, like, where do I start to be able to put that in place?
Yeah. So up front, it takes time. I'm going through that right. I would say, like, to get my team to a really refined process took about a year. And the reason is, you're changing human behavior. This is why change management is such an industry and why it's so slow. Like, you're asking people who did something one way to start doing it a different way. And you can't just give them a doc and expect them to start doing it. I love Denny's comment. Like, clearly he knows the power of engineers being empowered. It's going to take time. And so I'm on a new team right now, and this is something that we're working on. And so to your question of, like, where do I start? I start with our engineering manager. He or she is like your partner day in and day out. Everything that you're working on, they should be aware of, and they should be a part of what is the process. And if your engineering manager is not on board with, like, the ways in which you want to empower the team, you need to get them on board or find alignment with them on how to go about it. But if you don't have your engineering manager, like, partnering strongly with you on this, it's going to be really, really challenging. And so you need to find, like, how can I get aligned with them? How can I leverage their experience and expertise to, like, build a more empowered team? And if you tell them, hey, if these engineers are more empowered, that's going to take a lot off your plate, they will be all ears, because it's going to allow them to do other things that they want to do and spend less time in the weeds. To me, it's all about getting your engineering manager on board up front, and just knowing that it's going to take a long time. And so the way that we go about it, and the way we are going about it, is I join this team. They already have stuff in flight, like, that they're developing. Now is not the time to take something that they're working on and say, let's go build an engineering solution. It's not going to work like that. So what we're doing right now is figuring out what we're going to do in Q4. That'll be the first stuff. That'll be the first things that, like, I have my stamp on, and then more so next year. And so the things that we start that have not been developed yet, those will be the first projects that actually have this approach. And those haven't even started yet. Like, we're still figuring out what the things are that we're going to do. And once we do that and we build some briefs, which we're working on the briefs right now, that's when we'll start handing it over to engineers and start building out that solution process. But even this process in and of itself, like, outside of how long does it take to get a team really refined, like, these projects, like, they take a long time. And I'll give you one example. My last team is in the middle. I had to leave before we finished, but they're in the middle of this large transformation of our back-end platform. And we're taking things from a relatively manual process to a highly automated process. The time in which I told my engineering manager we need a technical solution for this, from the time until we started developing it, was 7 or 8 months. So I went to him and said, and this was a really big project. So I actually had him architect it at a high level. And it required, like, talking to partner teams, talking to other, like, engineering teams that are microservices leveraged. That took the first, like, 3 months. And then the next, like, month was him just putting a high level solution together. And then he tagged individual engineers to come up with solutions within that. And that took a long, long time. And so again, like, engineers, just like PMs, we can't just sit down and come up with the perfect product by ourselves. Engineers can't do the same with engineering. They need to talk to other engineers. They need time to research things. And so, like, just knowing that it's going to take time up front, but it's going to pay dividends later. And so it's worth investing. And so, again, I would start with the engineering manager up front. That's, like, your key partner and everything. And identifying that first project that gives your engineer time to actually do this. Like, if you expect them to turn it around in 2 weeks, that's going to be tough. You need to give them time to write a draft, review it with you and the engineering manager, take it to other engineers, like give them time to work with it. And I think you'll be surprised with where they might take it. And they probably will do things that you hadn't thought of that are actually a really good idea.
And what do you say in people that will say that? Because since it takes time, as you said, because it can take 5-6 months, it's not from certain people, it's not a job, right?
Yeah.
Because you have a 2-week sprint and working as we know and all that. What would you say? What would you say if people say that?
I mean, I would say welcome to product management. like that's the name of the game. That this is why a lot of teams don't do that. It's hard. Yeah. It's hard. And so, like I said, like my team is building stuff right now. We are not doing these solution docs. We are on Slack. We are in random docs, comments. We're just putting it together as best we can. But the goal is to not stay like that. And a lot of teams find themselves in the daily firefight. They're fighting bugs. They're fighting asks from management and leadership. They're fighting asks from stakeholders. And they're not taking the time to think, where do we want to be a year from now? And how do we get to there? And so you have to set aside some capacity to deal with the day-to-day, but set a vision and tell the team how it's going to get better. And you can all dedicate time to that iterative improvement as well. And if you do dedicate the time and energy and resources to that, you'll get there.
That's for me, like this is like the definition of true leadership, like taking aside the stuff and doing the hard thing because this is the vision that you have. I got a question. I got a question for me. What is that Eagles football behind you? Yeah, I'm an Eagles fan. So yeah, for people that can see that.
I was surprised too. I didn't know you're an American football fan.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Canada, and I started to watch them in the 2000 while it was still Reed at the top, and McNabb. So yeah, it's one of my things. So yeah, I have a T-shirt, and I went to see them when we were in London after they won the Super Bowl. So which was a great thing after 15 years supporting them. So that's
sorry about losing the last Super Bowl.
No, it's okay. We can't win them all. I will have a question from Danny after, but just a small question, because you talked about the engineer manager, and I know that we're reaching the time, but there is a lot of quite war when you can see out there, when you read on Reddit and you read in different comments where people don't get along with their engineer manager. Where do you feel this misunderstanding are coming from your experience between engineer manager and product? And it could
to me
to do better.
Yeah, I think to me it really comes down to every product manager is likely familiar with engineers wanting to do more like engineering things. They want to take care of tech debt. They want to clean up the code. They want to do things that probably don't impact your customer that much. And in my opinion, like you've got to find ways to address those things. You've got just like your users are your customers, your engineers, like you can think of them as a customer. What are their problems and how are you prioritizing those? And it's incumbent upon you as a product manager to find ways to influence your leadership to say this tech debt is worth doing and here's why. Right. And just to give like a quick story on that, last year, Southwest Airlines had this massive disruption in the US where like all the planes for like 2 days were canceled. And what it all boiled down to was tech debt. Years and years and years of tech debt that Southwest never took care of. And then it bit them in the ass like 10 years later. And they had to cancel flights for days and days. The tech upgrades they're going to have to do are going to take years because they just allowed it to accumulate. And those are kinds of things that your engineering manager is telling product managers, we need to avoid these kinds of issues. And it's up to you to discern when that's true and when it's not, because sometimes they want to do things and they're not as important as they think, but also to address those needs of your engineers. And so in my opinion, I think that's where a lot of the disagreement comes between product and engineers. Is product are like, we got to take care of our customers. And the engineers are like, the architecture that we have today is not working for us. It's complicated. It takes us longer to deliver. And so it's incumbent upon you to figure out how can you sell that to leadership. And that's a really hard thing about being a PM is like, how do you tell leadership this is worth prioritizing? But I think you have to figure out a way to do that. And I think if you go to your engineering manager and say, hey, I want to do that thing to help you guys out. How can we figure out to sell this to leadership? Is it going to improve performance? Is it going to reduce downtime? Is it like, what can we talk? Is it going to allow us to ship faster later on? That's how I sold the project I was talking about before, that big architecture work that we're doing, where we're automating a lot of our work. The engineers are very excited about that because it's going to make their lives easier, but it's also going to make our analysts on our team's life easier. It's also going to be better for our partner teams that we work with. And I won't get into details, but it's also going to be beneficial to our partner teams. And on top of all of that, it's going to enable increased business growth. And so, but we didn't come to that realization until we had a lot of conversations with a lot of different folks. And so, going back to that engineering manager conflict, like taking like what they request seriously, showing your perspective, saying, and being open, like, hey, we're all nice people. Like, we want to help each other. Like, how can we figure out on what we can do and what we can't? You don't have to do everything your engineering manager wants. But like, I think when they come to you and they say, hey, this code is crap, like we need to take time to clean it up, like you need to listen, because that's going to make your engineers deliver faster. And that's something that you should be interested in. And it's going to make their lives easier. And so I think, that open and transparent conversation, like treating their feedback with respect and having those conversations, I think, not enough people do that. But I think if you do, you can find a common ground.
Yeah, I think you said something that is really true, and we don't see enough, which is we understand and putting the customer at the center, but it's also putting our team at the center. It's also putting the company at the center. And I think this is what you were saying, which is we can make things better, but we can also make things better for us. It's not just about the customer. And sometimes making things better for us means making it better for the customer and going on the other side of Southwest, for example.
And if you talk to engineers, a lot of them have left former teams because they couldn't get any of the engineering stuff improved. Like they're dealing with bugs every day. They're fighting fires every day. They don't get to do the fun stuff that they thought they were going to do when they were getting that engineering degree. They're just dealing with crap every day, and they're going to leave your team. So like it's in everybody's best interest that you address their needs. And that's generally what the engineering manager is coming to the PM with.
Totally. So I have a question from Danny that is based on what we discussed earlier. So we're going to go back and then we're going to wrap up because we reached the end. So question from Danny is, as a product leader, do you draw a line for what you share from your personal life and whatnot?
That's a good question. Danny's getting deep here on a Friday. I mean, not really. If I'm being totally honest, like not really. I don't know if that's right or wrong. But I'll tell you why. So, and it goes back to the military. The military is like a unique world, where personal life and work are very connected. On US military bases, families live on those bases. There's base housing, and you can live on the military base if you want. The community is very tight. Like everybody lives close to base or on base. Everybody knows each other. All the spouses are friends. All the people at work are friends. Like it's a very tight-knit community. And on top of that, like when troops get in trouble, leadership gets in trouble. So in the private industry, if someone that works for you gets a DUI, you may not even find out. And it doesn't really concern you. But in the military, when one of my troops got a DUI, which is driving under the influence in the US, basically driving drunk, I got in trouble, even though I had nothing to do with it. Even though they were out on a Friday night being stupid, I had to go stand in front of our commanding officer and have a conversation about with that individual about what they did wrong, why it happened, and why didn't I prevent it. And so accountability is like a really big thing in the military. And there was also another story where I was every military base has an officer of the day, and it's that officer's job to basically be the point of contact for the base. And every officer doesn't want officer of the day on Friday or Saturday nights, because that's when people go out and get in trouble and you're the person they call. And there was a troop who got busted for drugs, and they called the base. And at 2 a.m. I got a call, and I had to drive into work, and I had to deal with this guy because he was in jail, and we had to deal. It was like a whole thing, right? And so the reason I bring all that up is because that's the culture that I came up with, where we knew everything about everyone. Like certainly like not everything, you know what I mean? But like very deeply personal connections. And we would go on deployment for 6 months. You're sitting next to someone for 6 months. You're going to get to know them pretty well, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's just how I am. Like, I just get to know people and pretty deeply. I don't ask people to share things they wouldn't want to share, but I'd certainly like to know, are they married or in a relationship? Do they have kids? Where are they from? What are their interests? And, people will over time share more or less than others. But I just try to let people share what they're willing to. And I try to be open about like what I'm willing to share with them. And sometimes you uncover like crazy things. Like they're like, yeah, my mom has cancer and it's been really bothering me at work, and those things are helpful for you to know,
Yeah.
And so, but again, like you don't want to ask for those things. Like people need to feel comfortable sharing those types of things.
But you're not digging down for information. It's just the trust that is building that is coming back with that. And
right. So I don't really have much of a line. I'm not saying other people need to do that.
So that's okay. It's a personal thing, I guess.
Yeah.
We're reaching the end, and I just want to finish just before you go. For the last 3 questions, it was a blast, by the way, doing that. I really want to continue for like 2 hours, but I know we don't have the time. So what do you hope will be your legacy or lasting impact, in digital leadership and in product management?
Yeah, there's I love this question. There is a quote that I've heard several times while I was in the military, and there's books with this title, and it's Mission First, People Always. And the concept is like, we have a job to do. Like every company, most companies, I guess, have a mission, like I was at Capital One, it was change banking for good. And other companies have like a mission statement. And that is what we do day in and day out, is support that ultimate mission. Like everything we work on should ladder up to like supporting that goal. But the people you work with matter, and you've got to take care of them in whatever way that you can, no matter whether you are an executive or an individual contributor. Like it's your job to take care of the people that you work with. And so that's how I would describe it. Again, I didn't come up with that. But I've heard several talks on it and have really like felt like that describes like how I see things, which is mission first, people always.
That's an amazing quote. I love it. I knew the people product profit, where people put like profit. They don't say profit first, but they put it, or they put product first. But right. I love this quote. It's a really nice quote. Any leader that you follow or book you recommend for new leaders?
Yes, Denny. If Denny's still on, he'll recognize this one because we talked about it once. It's called Turn Your Ship Around, and it's by Captain David Marquette. And it is a great story in empowered leadership from the Navy. Captain Marquette was a Navy submarine captain, and he took his submarine from the lowest ranking sub in the Navy to the top sub in the Navy. And he did it by empowering his boat. In the Navy, they call subs boats, but he empowered everybody on his boat, which is very different from a traditional submarine culture, which is like the commanding officer makes all the calls. He actually empowered everybody way down the chain to actually say, like, to instead of taking orders, to tell their leader what they think they should do. And then their leader would sign off on it. And that totally flipped the head on how the subs typically operate. And as a result, he, had the top performing sub in the Navy. And so it's Turn Your Ship Around by David Marquette. I highly recommend it.
Okay, we will put that in the comments. And finally, for emerging leaders in the digital and product realm, what's one piece of advice you wish you'd receive earlier in your career?
So obviously, I've talked a lot about like how important people are, like in developing like your leadership skills, and how I think people overlook that because it takes a long time to develop those relationships. But one of the things, and so I won't belabor that point, but one of the things that I learned later on in my career that I hadn't thought of and I wish I had heard was assume positive intent. Like when you're at work, nobody's trying to screw you. Like very, very unlikely that they're trying to screw you or do something that, is mean or whatever. Like assume, like, and I was surprised at how long it took me to hear that quote, but like assume positive intent, assume the person that did the thing had good intentions in mind. And that will totally like reframe how you deal with them, because every once in a while, there are contentious conversations at work. And what I've found is like, I can avoid that contentious conversation if I assume positive intent on the other side. Because 99% of the time it was positive. You know, it's very, very rarely anyone's trying to like be a jerk to be a jerk. You know, at the end of the day, we all have a job. We're trying to do a good job. And so I think assuming positive intent is like such an important thing when you get into those situations where you think like someone was trying to do something they shouldn't have. Like sometimes people do that. But I think assuming positive intent can like help you come at that situation with like a clarity of mind, and unearth whether or not they had positive intent. Like assume positive intent up front, but like maybe you find that there actually was bad intent there. But I think assuming that up front like helps you come with a clear, more positive like perspective, and helps you from assuming the negative, which rarely is the case.
That's amazing. Like assuming positive intent. We have also just one comment that we didn't receive on our side, but it's on the LinkedIn. We have Ayush that says astonishing overlap between product management and military concept, communication, community, collaboration, and leadership. Such a delicate way to be an empowering individual and enabler across the board. Kudos to you, Pat. So,
no, that's a great comment. Yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, who would have known? You know, there's so much alignment between the two.
So much. Because I love that also. Like, do you have any question that you will have for our next guest, or any question that is burning your mind in the world of leadership and?
Oh, for me, for your next guest?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a question I would love to hear about. Like, how do you balance new emerging trends to make sure that you're implementing them in the right way? And let me expand on that for a second. AI is like everywhere now, right? And everybody's trying to figure out how they can leverage AI in their product. But occasionally we see situations where AI is being implemented purely for the sake of implementing AI rather than actually solving a problem. And so one of the things that I've been particularly interested in is how do you make sure that you're actually solving a problem and not just implementing it for the sake of it?
I love the question. I love the question for that. You touch the digital and the leadership and all that. But thanks a lot. It's been amazing. We're going to close now. Thank you so much for the first one. Couldn't have been better. And thank you for experiencing with me to be live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter at the same time. I love this.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for having me, Phil.
You're welcome. See you all. I will publish the recording on all the channels, and also if you wanna follow me, if you wanna follow Pat, you can find us Pat the PM on Twitter, myself Phil Arjo PM, and we're also on LinkedIn, and and I'm also on YouTube, so you can find the recording and everything about us. And come and ask us any question that you have, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah.
Have a great day, Pam.